I just want to go ahead and welcome everyone again, and we will go ahead and get started with today's webinar. My name is Natalie. I am a program manager at the Clio Institute. I've been with Clio for just about over a year, and I am joined today by John Morales. John, did you want to say hi?
Of course, I can say hi as soon as I mute myself. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to, be talking about a lot of things some of you might know and some things that you don't know. And eventually, we're going to end on a message of hope. So hopefully, this is going to be a good session.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, John. And I see that we have a great number of participants. Thank you all for making time to learn about the climate crisis during these challenging times. Really appreciate all of you for being here with us today. So before we jump into all that we're going to be learning today, just quickly covering some house rules. We do welcome questions and conversations at the end. If you have any questions, please place them in the Q&A Zoom function towards the toolbar. And if you have any other comments, links, or resources that you want to share with others attendees, go ahead and drop them in the chat function. If you drop a question in the chat box, it's likely that it might get missed. So make sure that you put questions in the Q&A Zoom function. And we will have an opportunity to talk to John and have our questions answered one-on-one at the end of this webinar. And then lastly, we are going to be sending up a follow-up email with any resources that are discussed. I do have my colleague Julieta here helping me troubleshoot should we have any issues this afternoon. She will be manning the chat function. So if you have any issues, go ahead and chat Julieta Clio Institute and she should be able to help you out. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I know that we all come from varied climate backgrounds. Maybe you have heard of Clio before and maybe you haven't. But what I'm going to do is just make sure that we all start on the same page in this webinar. So I'm going to take the next 2 or 3 minutes to give you the briefest brief on the climate crisis. Starting off with Clio and who Clio is. So Clio was founded in a living room about 10 years ago by Caroline Lewis. Clio is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to climate action and advocacy. And we're also nonpartisan. We used vetted and science-rooted reports and peer-reviewed analysis to engage in these climate conversations and these climate actions. So throughout the presentation, you'll see where we get our information from, including NASA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, the CDC, and so on. And what Clio really does is take science and these reports and break it down into digestible bits for people from all walks of life. So we do a top-down, bottom-up approach when it comes to climate action and advocacy. We work with everyone from elected officials to students in different municipalities. And there you can see some pictures and our mighty founder, Caroline Lewis, there on the bottom right. So like I said, I just want to make sure that we all start off on the same page today. So I'm going to give a brief climate crisis 101, and that definitely starts off with the scientific consensus. So virtually 100% of actively publishing climate scientists not only agree that climate warming is happening, but they also agree that it is extremely likely due to human activities. So that made my ears perk up when I first heard about it. What human activities could be driving this? And it really is our industrial activities that have raised the amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, as well as other greenhouse gases. So our economic engine is dominated by these carbon-rich prehistoric remains that we burn and refine to power our industry, our transportation, electrification, manufacturing. So we're taking these elements and releasing them into the atmosphere, and there's a lot of consequences that come along with this. So this is one of the most important graphs as a climate scientist that you'll see, and I'm going to explain why. What you can see towards the left of this graph is that before the Industrial Revolution, there was natural climate variation. So you see that the atmospheric level of carbon dioxide varied between 200 parts per million and 300 parts per million. And that took place over thousands and thousands of years, over a millennia. And what you see there in this graph is that there was like a self-regulating mechanism, a checks and balances mechanism with the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. However, at the brink of the modern industrial revolution, we see a statistically significant difference of the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And so why do we care about carbon dioxide? Carbon dioxide is one of the greenhouse gases that fundamentally drives global climate change. So greenhouse gases, what they do is they slow down the ability for heat to escape the earth. And what John is going to walk us through today in this webinar is the impacts that increased heat has on the weather that we experience. So with an increased amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the earth is getting hotter. And this image from NASA takes the unique vantage view from outer space to really show our planet as an interconnected mechanism. And it really helps to take this approach when we talk about the impacts of climate. So the earth is getting hotter, and as of 2019, those were the 5 hottest years on record from 2015 to 2019. So that is a brief intro to the climate crisis. And what I'm going to do now is stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and let John share his screen so he can take it away with some of the impacts of this increased heat and of climate that we're experiencing.
It's important to unmute myself before I start sharing the screen. Here we go. Let's see here, share, and all right. All right, everybody should be seeing that. You know, I'm talking about Southern Florida, but mainly you can look at this as the entire Florida Peninsula, and for that matter, the entire state. And we're going to be talking about what's ahead in a warming world. And we're going to end the presentation with a bit of a more optimistic viewpoint. I am the chief meteorologist of the NBC-owned station in Miami, WTVJ. That's Florida's legacy station. It's over 70 years old, founded in 1949. Yes, there was TV in 1949. Proud to have been elected as a fellow of the American Meteorological Society. I also do some consulting on the side. Pride myself in at least trying to emulate, but never being able to reach the ability to be a science communicator like my hero Carl Sagan was. And no, I am not Carl Sagan. I wish I could be closer to what he was able to accomplish, but I certainly aim to follow in the footsteps of being not just a on-air broadcast meteorologist, but also to be my TV station's scientist, and really on social media platforms to be one that can communicate science in layman terms to everyone. Yeah, some awards along the way. And by the way, I am beyond an atmospheric scientist, beyond a meteorologist. I am soon going to be able to call myself an environmental scientist too, as I am on the last home stretch here of completing a master's degree in environmental science and policy. So again, we'll look at climate hazards affecting Florida: heat, rain, whether it's excessive or maybe lack thereof; sea level rise, which these days, just particularly these days, this week, is a big deal as we enter king tide season in Florida. And then we'll look at what's ahead from my personal opinion.
Does it seem like we just lost John? Okay, so I apologize about that. We're going to give him just a moment to see if he can reconnect. Thank you all so much for your patience. And it seems like he was about to get into a really interesting graphic here from Climate Central. So we'll just, let me see if I can troubleshoot on my end. It seems like we might have gotten John. There you go. Let me stop sharing.
I apologize. Apparently some local connectivity issues, and I have switched to an alternate method of being able to live stream from here. So hopefully everybody is currently hearing me. I am going to start sharing my screen again.
Sounds good.
All right. So I believe I was just mentioning sea level rise, and look at how much that threat increases for Tampa. And it's the same for Miami. It's the same for Fort Lauderdale, for cities in Southwest Florida. It's particularly bad in all locations in the Florida Keys. That threat is increasing rapidly. Well, ocean chemistry, I'm talking about ocean acidification and all the repercussions. It's, you know, so it's not just how it's affecting coral reefs, it's how it's affecting many other things regarding our biosphere there, particularly in regards to the oceans. Heat waves, well, that's kind of obvious. We're going to get more of those, and general warming and all the problems that that brings. So let's look at this animation here. And I think this is one of the easiest ways to understand what's going on with our increasing heat, our warming planet here. So, you know, you may not notice necessarily that, you know, the high temperatures in June, July, August, and September, instead of reaching commonly 90 or 91 degrees, are reaching 93 or 94 degrees more often, because, you know, changes in Florida in terms of the daily temperature are generally not that drastic. It's not like if we lived in Denver and one day it's, you know, 80 degrees and the next day it's 30 degrees. It doesn't work that way down here. But that 1 or 2 degree shift in the average temperature can cause the extremes, particularly on the upper side, on the hot side, to start to occur more often. So look at the right-hand side of this bell curve and understand that as we shift the averages to the right, everything that falls outside 1 or 2 standard deviations, if you can remember very basic statistics when you look at this bell curve, you understand that everything is getting shifted to the right and we're getting more frequent events under the extreme heat umbrella. And as a matter of fact, Miami is one of many cities in the Florida Peninsula right now undergoing, or going through the hottest year on record. The records in Miami date back to the 19th century. The records down in Key West, where they're also experiencing one of the hottest years on record, date back to the mid-19th century. And by the way, I mean, we can look further back through proxies. I mean, there's many other ways to look at temperatures and how they were way before we had instrumentation around the planet. You know, things from you know, ice cores to to all kinds of other things that can help us tell what temperatures were way back in the past. But the bottom line is that we're seeing less cold and more heat extremes. And another way that that's being reflected here in Miami. This year, so far, 172 record hot temperatures. And I'll add that that's for Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and Key West. So those three cities, 172 record hot temperatures this year, including record daytime highs and record warm minimum temperatures, versus only 2 cold temperature records that we've measured so far in the year 2020. 172 to 2, the ratio of hot records to cold records. And I think that fits perfectly into this shifting bell curve that I've just shown you on screen. All right, let's see if I can move on to the next slide here. I hope. Well, I'm having a bit of difficulty shifting to the next slide. I don't know if it's my connection. Ah, there we go. And now I went too far. There we go. 1, 2, 3. Must be the fact that I'm connecting through a cell phone signal. You guys can still hear me? Okay. All right. I'll put up the next slide very soon here, we hope. Am I still sharing my screen?
You are, and it just moved over to the next slide.
All right. So.
But unfortunately, you're not in presentation mode, John. So if you want to just click presentation mode to enlarge the slide.
Yeah, a delay because I'm connected via a cell phone connection here because there must have been some kind of dropout. I was informed that there's a Comcast truck outside, so now that outside another home, but apparently they're working on it at this very hour. Well, I don't know if you're seeing this large or small, but you should be seeing something that says days with heat index over 100. There's your historical averages per city on the bottom left. And there's what you can expect towards mid and late century if we continue business as usual, meaning that we continue to inject greenhouse gases into the atmosphere at the same rate that we've been doing. If we take bold action and find ways to curtail, well, there's a lot of heat that's already baked into the system. Significant increase, a doubling or tripling or quadrupling of the number of heat index days above 100 degrees. Why is that important? Well, because when our heat index values get over 100 and particularly 105 degrees, we end up with a lot of people getting sick. Heat is a stealth killer. It doesn't often make the news unless there's a huge heat wave like the one in Europe several years ago, or in Chicago, even longer in the 1990s, if I'm not mistaken. But, you know, on occasion you'll hear of an athlete, a football player in particular, who has been struck down by a heat stroke, ended up in the hospital, oftentimes ending up in a fatality. And the rates of hospitalizations in the state of Florida in recent years due to heat-related illnesses has indeed been increasing. If you try to fit a best fit line to this bar graph, obviously it is trending up. And it's because it's definitely a no-brainer in terms of what's already happening and what's expected to happen going forward. And it makes it being outside quite dangerous. And I should mention before I get off this subject, we just had a webinar on this last week. The people that are most affected by this unrelenting heat and the increasing heat are the most vulnerable populations. So, you know, don't think of just the single, American football player with his gear on and having some kind of heat stroke. Think of tens of thousands of people who live in the urban heat islands, inside the center of Miami, and who may own air conditioners but can't even afford to run the air conditioner because it's a choice between paying the rent, putting food on the table, or being able to run the AC and then pay the power company in the end. And when you don't, when you're forced into these choices, and you're already carrying a series of chronic, our frontline communities already disproportionately have, then you throw heat illnesses on top of other chronic conditions, and you've got people really getting sick and possibly dying because of the increasing heat. So this is something that needs to, we need to take bold action to mitigate the amount of greenhouse gases that are being injected into the atmosphere so that we can slow this down. And instead of, a degree and a half or 2 degrees Celsius, we end up with 3 or 4 or 5 degrees Celsius of warming towards the end of the century. But we're also going to have to adapt and take everyone into consideration: the agricultural workers, the construction workers who are working in this heat, those inner city communities that are suffering in this heat. There are adaptation measures that need to take into account these climate justice solutions as we go forward. All right. The signal in terms of rain, and you're looking at the entire Caribbean, I wanted to show kind of a broader picture here because I think the signal is quite clear that it is going to trend drier as we go towards the middle and latter portion of the century. And that brings on an immense amount of challenges for the Caribbean nations, which are generally, small nations with few resources, considered developing countries. Without rainwater, it's going to be very difficult going forward. In the case of Florida, we get kind of a mixed signal. Some parts of the state might be drier, some parts of the state might be wetter, but only by 10%. So it's neither up nor down, right? But here's the problem. A lot of the rain that comes is coming in short bursts. So we get long, dry stretches where, because the temperatures are hotter, you get a greater degree of evapotranspiration, meaning that the vegetation and the soil dries out faster because of the hotter temperatures. Think of what's going on in California. Okay, because this is not just an American West problem, this thing of the increasing wildfires, all over the world. And where each region has its own, says my internet connection is unstable. I hope you guys can still hear me. Where other parts of the world have their own complicating, confounding factors as to why burning so much more. One thread that is to every corner of the world where you're seeing increasing wildfires, from Australia to the American West to Siberia, is climate change, is a warming of the temperatures, which again makes for faster developing droughts and faster vegetation. So yes, fine. Forest management is an issue in the American West, but things would not be they are today if it wasn't for climate change. Yes, of course there'd be fires, and maybe the fires would be worse than they were 50 years ago, but they wouldn't be apocalyptic like they are right now, because that is being driven by climate change. Back to the downpours. So we may get the same amount of rain, plus or minus 10%, but the rain will come in short bursts and in very intense bursts that can lead to flash flooding and difficulty for our infrastructure to deal with so much rain in such a short amount of time. You can see that there's an increase in the heaviest of the precipitation events. In the Southeast, it's about a 27% increase. In the Northeast, it's 55%. So they're getting much heavier rain in short periods of time, and that, from soil erosion to the drainage not being able to handle it, to flash floods that can threaten people's lives, there are many consequences to getting our precipitation only in short bursts, as I described. All right, so hurricanes. Here is a list of numerous new records that have been set mainly in the Atlantic. There's a couple of ones here that are from elsewhere in the planet. But just last year, Hurricane Dorian, the strongest hurricane ever recorded outside of the Tropic of Cancer, the strongest one to strike the Bahamas, the strongest one to strike any landmass, tied with the 1935 Great Labor Day hurricane that struck the Florida Keys. How about the easternmost hurricane, the easternmost major hurricane? I'm kind of jumping around the list here. So easternmost hurricane, Pablo. Easternmost major hurricane, Ophelia. Easternmost Cat 5 hurricane, Lorenzo. How about the rainiest? Harvey and Florence. Lane was up over in Hawaii. Barry. Those all established records. Irma in 2017, that hurricane that I was so worried about for us here in South Florida when I was broadcasting on TV here in our local TV market. The world record for the longest continuous Cat 5 anywhere on the planet, not just in the Atlantic. And September 2017, yes, the Atlantic holds the record now for the highest accumulated cyclone energy. It's an index that measures, well, hurricane or cyclone activity. And September 2017, compared to any tropical basin in the world, including the Western Pacific, where those typhoons are so infamous, well, we beat the Western Pacific too. Now we've lived through the busiest ever month ever recorded in any tropical basin. So lots of records in terms of rainfall, in terms of hurricane intensity. Why is this happening? Well, that's also being driven by a warming world. Warmer oceans are being observed all over the planet. Peer-reviewed studies indicate that the proportion of tropical cyclones in the planet that are reaching category 3, 4, and 5 intensity is higher today than it was, 40 or 50 years ago. We're looking only at the satellite era here to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. So I'm not going back to the year 1850 and trying to reconstruct, whether a ship happened to run into a hurricane or whether a hurricane happened to cross over any landmass. This is the era in which we can look at tropical cyclones all over the planet because we can remotely sense them through satellites. And if you do a trend line there, you can see that around the planet, we are seeing a greater percentage of those tropical storms, hurricanes, typhoons, and cyclones reaching a major category, in this case, 4 and 5, because I actually got a hold of this slide before the study was published. And that study was only published a couple of months ago, by the way. So this is very new science, peer-reviewed. And what it tells you is that we're not necessarily seeing more storms or more hurricanes. So, this record number of hurricanes in the Atlantic this year, I don't know, as a scientist, if I'd be able to categorically tell you right now that that is linked to climate change. I can't tell you that. I can't tell you that the fact that we're going to run out of letters and soon go to the Greek alphabet is caused by climate change. But what I can tell you is that all these hurricanes that are doing rapid intensification cycles just before they reach land, just like Sally did, like Laura did, like Harvey did back in 2017. All these systems that are ramping up in intensity so quickly, those rapid intensification cycles are happening much more often now, being fueled by a hotter ocean. Sea surface temperatures are up basically all around the planet, except near Greenland, where the melting ice off the Greenland polar caps is keeping the water relatively cool up there. So what does that mean going forward? And I want you to really try to ponder this rhetorical question I'm going to after I explain this graphic, I'm going to pose to all of you. So I know this is a complicated graphic, and this is from Kerry Emanuel, climate scientist at MIT. I had the pleasure of sitting down and interviewing Kerry Emanuel up there in Cambridge a couple of years back for our Channel 6 hurricane special. here in Miami. And he shared this slide with me because, of course, I'm from Puerto Rico. I did not, I was not located in Puerto Rico when Maria came through, but my mom was, and basically all my family on my mother's side were. And it was extremely distressing, a very emotional experience. Probably my Facebook Live for that approach of that hurricane is the hardest thing I've ever had to do in media. And yeah, I don't work for a TV station down there, but I try to serve my my fellow Puerto Ricans down there with at least some social media posts. And that post was very difficult to record because I knew what was coming with that Cat 4. So what this chart is showing you is the current return period of a hurricane like Maria on final approach to Puerto Rico. Maria, when she was at 17 degrees north and 64 degrees west, which is what you see there at the top of that graph, in a location south of St. Croix in the US Virgin Islands, had winds sustained at 150 knots, which is about 165 miles per hour, the sustained winds as the hurricane was approaching. And the return period, in other words, how often, on average, might you see a hurricane of that intensity within 150 kilometers of that location, okay? In the year 2000, the return period might be about once every 200 years. So you look at the dot there that intersects the 150 knots where the arrow, the Maria, is located, and then you go left across the screen, and basically on that logarithmic scale, it looks to be at 200. Well, given the changes in the physics of the atmosphere, given the changes in ocean temperatures around the planet, and the dynamics of how a hurricane works and feeds itself off that warm water, well, we're changing the speed limit, basically, on hurricanes and typhoons all over the world. And now, an event that might have been expected to occur once every 200 years might instead occur every 20 years. My question is, how does a society possibly adjust to have to deal with a catastrophe of the nature of Maria once every 20 years instead of every 200 years? Is it even possible to be resilient enough, to build strong enough, to have contingency plans, to maybe build only in places that are safe? Can we get there? What about the economic repercussions of being hit, like this, to have a hit to your economy like this every 20 years? Given what Puerto Rico has gone through and is still going through today, I wonder whether that's even possible. All right, sea level rise, which will lead us to start wrapping up our presentation here and opening up for a little wrap up and eventually some questions. First, the obvious, right? Higher sea levels means higher storm surge from hurricanes. So Sally is a disaster greatly because of water. I know the wind blew at 100 miles an hour, and I've seen a couple of pictures of not very well constructed structures that were blown away by the wind. But the main threat and the main disaster from Sally is water in the form of storm surge, which inundated downtown Pensacola and all surrounding communities, and rainwater. Another record-setting, incredible amount of water coming from a single hurricane. You might recall maybe 5 years ago or so, there was a picture that went viral on social media of a live octopus in a parking garage of a Miami Beach condo. And, I would classify that as a novelty. Obviously, the picture went viral, even for folks right here in South Florida, even for people in Miami Beach. Look, a live octopus in a parking garage. How did that get there? Well, it got there because it was king tide season. The Biscayne Bay was much higher than normal. We, of course, had the king tide, which is a time of the year when we get higher tides because of the astronomical interaction between the moon, the sun, and the earth. Uh, and I think people saw the picture and, it called attention to sea level rise, but then it all kind of went away, just like a lot of viral things, in one day and out the next. But then as you think of this timeline of how we're living through the sea level rise issue, I don't think we're there anymore. I think, we're either in the nuisance phase where, and by nuisance, I mean, if you live in Brickell and you have to get to Southeast 12th and Bayshore Drive because you're going to your house, to your condo, to your apartment, and either your car gets ruined from salt water, or if you happen to have taken the Metro Mover, you're going to get there and your shoes are going to be ruined, and you're going to be waiting in frankly pretty disgusting water. That's a nuisance. What else is a nuisance? Tourists in Miami Beach also having to, somehow carry their suitcases on their shoulders because they don't want their clothes to get wet because they're having to wade to be able to get into the front door. And then there's those neighborhoods, over in Miami Shores and Shorecrest and, the closer to the coast areas of Fort Lauderdale and other locations, Coconut Grove as well, where there are times of the year that it's just hard to get in and out of your house. And it starts to affect your lifestyle, and it starts to affect your pocketbook. There are studies already from Harvard and others that are indicating that some of what used to be considered prime real estate here in South Florida, waterfront homes and such, where prices are already being pressured. Prices are coming down because questions are being asked by the buyers about, hey, how many days a year do you have trouble getting in and out of your house? Is your road often flooded with salt water, even if it's not raining? And people know, and of course, there's a UM study, University of Miami study, that indicates that here in South Florida, just in the last 20 years, the number of days in which we're seeing sunny day floods, saltwater floods where the tide has come up, but there's not a drop of rain, all right, has increased by 400% in those 20 years. And this is only the beginning. And eventually it's going to become an existential issue. But even before that water is lapping up on those Art Deco buildings on Ocean Drive, like so many artist renderings have shown, that would be the existential part, right? Way before we get there, these pocketbook issues are really going to affect us, because the reinsurers and insurers know that it's very difficult to justify providing insurance unless you provide it at a very high cost, because the losses from water are coming in much more frequently, and they just cannot justify, charging the amounts that they charge today. Some places are going to become uninsurable. The National Flood Insurance Program, which is the federal program that basically bails out the private industry and bails us out as well, in the sense that, if you want to have a waterfront home, your insurance is subsidized to such a degree, and the prices are kept so artificially low through the National Flood Insurance Program that you can actually, think that your insurance is cheap for where you live. Well, all those things are going to go away because we cannot continue to fund a bankrupt program. So pocketbook issues are going to start to make things very difficult. And I'm not telling you we all need to run away from South Florida, okay? But I need everybody to realize that we need to plan ahead. We need to plan for some of the changes that are already being seen, and this is just the beginning, and some of the changes that are coming. And I'm telling you, way before the water is inundating the streets, like in the sci-fi movies, okay, way before that, we're going to have some problems economically in our pocketbooks here in South Florida. Saltwater intrusion into the drinking wells. They've had to move our wells further west because that plume of saltwater has already invaded some of our wells where we draw fresh water from closer to the coast. Ecosystem changes in the Everglades. sadly, that's ongoing too. Big time pressure on the Everglades. That's why they're asking for more freshwater flow to come from the north like it used to back in the natural days before everything was drained and canaled here in South Florida. So I'll go through these very quickly because I know that I want to try to stop in 5 minutes or less. So, you know, our global mean sea level was, for the last 2,000 years or so, pretty stable, but now we're starting to see an acceleration. And then as you go forward, there is uncertainty. And it's not abnormal for scientists to have uncertainty. I can't give you an answer of whether it's going to rise 2 to 3 feet between now and the year 2100, or if it's going to rise 6 to 8 feet between now and the year 2100. Hard to tell because there's too many variables. You know, the Greenland ice cap, the Antarctic. Just in the last 2 weeks, there's been news of big ice shelves being separated from those Antarctica continent and this humongous island in the North Atlantic, separating and becoming icebergs. That adds to sea level going forward. So the projections are very dire going forward. You know, you look at this place. This is Fort Pulaski at the coast of Georgia. Look at the observations of the number of high tide flooding days observed per year. And you go back to the 60s and 70s, and it was pretty steady, not much going on. Then, especially in the 90s, you started to see an increase. And then, you know, in between 2000 and 2015 or 17 or so, you see a significant increase. And then you look at these projections going forward. And again, we're not sure. It could be extremely fast sea level rise, or it might be intermediately low sea level rise. But no matter how you dice it and slice it, we are going from, say, in 1980, what does it look like there? Maybe 3 days a year of high tide flooding to, you know, in the year 2040, let's use the intermediate line. So from 3 to 5 days, we're going to, looks like 140 days, right? What is that? 3,000% increase in the number of saltwater sunny day floods in that particular location. I'll skip this slide. So, you know, think of Hurricane Andrew back in 1992, kind of the you know, the one hurricane that many generations here in South Florida look back on as such a horrible disaster. And, you know, with Hurricane Andrew, if it came today, I'm sorry, not today, we've had a foot of sea level rise. If we have another foot of sea level rise, which some projections say that might happen as early as, you know, 2035, 2040, look at how far inland the storm surge would reach with 2 feet of sea level rise from Hurricane Andrew. So, you know, as opposed to just a few communities being impacted, we're talking the majority of South Florida being impacted by 4 feet or greater of storm surge. All right, my hopeful message before I end. Listen, and by Silent Spring, of course, I'm referring to Rachel Carson's book, written in the 1960s in the wake of years in which environmental degradation in this country was being increasingly observed by the general public, whether it was through media, but you know, we heard of terrible oil spills in California, rivers, you know, going on fire in Ohio. People could see their own, you know, their rivers polluted. The air with the smog in Los Angeles and other cities was just unbreathable, right? And on top of that, Rachel Carson wrote this book about DDT, a pesticide, and it all came together, it all gelled, and there was a lot of pressure from the public, from the voting public, upon their elected officials to make sure that the elected officials paid attention to the environment, because as they looked around, everything was being ruined. And that pressure led to an immense amount of environmental laws, from NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act, to the Endangered Species Act, to the Clean Air Act, to the Clean Water Act. All these things happened between the late 60s into the 70s. They've been modified and reformed a couple of times over the decades, but thanks to those protections, yes, our rivers have been cleaner. Our air has been cleaner. Rivers aren't, bursting out in fires. And yeah, I mean, of course, there's still terrible disasters, big oil spills, et cetera, but regulation has been able to bring all this in and at least slow down the rate of environmental degradation. Of course, during the present administration, that has all gone in the opposite direction. The deregulatory aspects of the Trump administration, where there's been over 100 things that they've targeted over the last 4 years, have led us to think that this is definitely a very dark moment in terms of climate, in terms of environment. But I think people are really energized about this. Everybody that follows the Clio Institute follows us for a reason. And they're doing it because they know that we all need to step up our action on climate. But just like Clio Institute has seen tremendous growth because of this, and our voice is being amplified by everybody that follows us, the same is happening in the National Resource Defense Council, the Defenders of Wildlife, all these different, World Wildlife Fund, all these NGOs have seen tremendous increases in their membership and their donations. And if, by the way, if it wasn't for these environmental organizations, all these deregulatory actions that have been taken over the last 3.5 years would have all passed without any hitches, without any problems. And if you think it's bad, it would be much worse, because thanks to lawsuits that all these environmental organizations, Environmental Defense Fund and others have taken, Sierra Club to mention another, they sue the government to stop them from making changes to these laws that have been protecting us. Us first. I want you to realize that. It's not so much about the landscape, although I want to protect the landscape. It's not so much about the animals, although I want to protect the animals. You have to realize this is about us and our health. And again, I go back to frontline communities. Black and brown communities are the ones that suffer the most from these environmental degradations that are attempting to be instituted during these 4 years. All right. So I think that we're seeing a lot of action at the local level. This is going to spill over at the national level. We're seeing progress here in Florida to a degree. The youth is definitely activated, and more important than all, voters are going to drive change on this subject matter. And, I am very hopeful that we are going to see a lot of action starting in 2021 to, yes, mitigate climate change, and mitigate as well, and go back to, sufficient regulations to rein in the pollution that continues to, or is increasingly becoming rampant during the last 4 years. All right, I think I've spoken way too long, and I should probably stop sharing my screen and hand over this to somebody else.
Thank you so much, John, for that amazing presentation. And I know that there's a lot of questions in the chat box, so I'll make my time brief, because I know there's a lot of questions that people have for you. So I'm Natalia Ortiz, and I am the Director of Development for the Clio Institute, and we're really excited to present to you the Florida Climate Crisis Campaign, or as we like to call internally, Melting Florida. I'm going to show you a quick video by Caroline Lewis, our founder, that will explain the campaign a little to you and then showcase what we currently have in our state. Go ahead, Nat.
The Clio Institute is a creation of mine that is designed to educate the masses about the importance and urgency of the climate change that we're experiencing now. So the Melting Florida campaign is sort of a genius design where we use art to really communicate the science and the urgency of the climate crisis. What we're trying to do is to say to people, hey, it's reality, it's a crisis. Pay attention. This is you. This is what you are causing. This is what's happening to us.
So the campaign is basically, we partnered with an ad agency, our funding partner, the Valo Foundation, the Union of Concerned Scientists, and an artist to develop these beautiful sculptures that represent what Florida means to us. And you can play that video as I talk. The Lifeguard House, there's actually a video, Nat. That's okay. So the Lifeguard House is a structure that represents our quality of life as well as our tourism. And these wax sculptures are actually interacting with the extreme heat that we're feeling day to day, and they will be melting. In addition to these sculptures, there is a Clio tower with a QR code that takes people to a floridaclimatecrisis.org landing page so they can learn about the extreme heat using the Union of Concerned Scientists heat maps. You don't only get a chance to see where our extreme heat is today, but you get to see what those days will look like in 20 to 30 years. So to give you an example, people in Orlando, 3 months out of the year, it will actually be considered extremely dangerous to visit the parks. So that's going to have a huge impact on our quality of life, our economy, our health. And our next structure or sculpture is the Florida Panther. She just launched, so the Miami Lifeguard House is at the Frost Museum right outside. You can visit it. Please wear your mask and practice social distancing. And it's going to be revealing a very impactful message. I won't display it because it hasn't been revealed yet, so you'll just have to follow us on social media to see what the message is. And our Panther and our family Panthers has just launched this week at the Zoo Tampa at Lowry Park. And the Mama Panther will also be melting and revealing a very impactful message, reminding people of the importance of our wildlife. And our third statue will be hosted next week at the City of Orlando in partnership with the city in front of City Hall. And I won't share anything about that statue. It's our favorite and most impactful, but you'll have to wait. So I strongly recommend you follow the Clio Institute on our social media so that you can get alerts on the status of these melting sculptures and what those messages will reveal. But my call to action to you today, Nat, and if you go ahead and take it to the next slide. My call to action to you today is, as we look at these beautiful statues as they melt and we understand what message is being revealed, the goal is to educate people, empower them, and have them sign the Florida Climate Pledge. We need our elected officials on both sides of the aisle to do bolder climate policies. They need to understand that us Floridians, and even those that don't live in Florida but care about Florida, we want more action to be done. So you can visit the flclimatecrisis.org website, where you can learn more about the extreme heat, interact with those heat maps from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and then sign the Florida Climate Pledge. We need our elected officials to do more. And then please feel free to repost, retweet, or reshare any of this campaign from our social media onto yours. Our upcoming event next week, which is our last one, will be hosted in conjunction with the Orlando launch. John's webinar today was in conjunction with Tampa launch, and it will be themed around surviving Florida summers. The heat stress on outdoor workers. We don't really think about that sometimes, but our agricultural industry, construction, anyone really who has to work outside is at an extreme disadvantage. And we have to understand what those vulnerabilities are and what we need to do to protect our outdoor workers. So I welcome you to continue to follow us on social media. Visit us at flclimatecrisis.org, learn more, sign the pledge, #FLClimateCrisis. I now leave it up to John and Nat to go ahead and do a Q&A for the rest of the webinar. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Nathy. The Florida Climate Crisis campaign, or the Melting Florida campaign, has been one of the most exciting things I think that we've done. So definitely follow us on social media to check out some of the updates on that. The urgent message will be revealed soon. So we do have some questions, and I know that we're just about at the end of our time. So stick around if you want to hear the answers to some of these questions. Let's see here. All right, so John, this question is for you, and it has to do with Puerto Rico. Do you think Puerto Rico has the political will to do a significant conversion to solar energy to become more resilient in the face of storms?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Puerto Rico situation is so complicated, right? Because, you know, definitely the energy grid is still, even after Maria and reconstruction, it's still outdated. It's still not good. So definitely switching to solar, or at least having solar be a greater component of the energy portfolio, would mean that they could be more resilient in the face of a new storm. But, you know, here's the problem. I mean, even if there were political will, who's controlling the purse in Puerto Rico right now? It's not Puerto Ricans, right? I mean, there's a fiscal oversight board that is currently basically indicating where can money be spent, where it cannot be spent, how much money can be spent on different things. And, you know, that's the reality. Regardless of how we got there, regardless of what it means in terms of Puerto Rico's political status, geopolitical status, that is today's reality. So, you know, I'm not trying to dodge the question, but I'm trying to be somewhat pragmatic and make the question asker realize that that is a laudable goal, but I think there's a lot of obstacles.
Thank you. So we actually have several questions that touch upon the same theme, which is very complicated as well. But a few of our attendees would like to know, at what point do you feel that we should start talking about a managed retreat?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. First off, realize where we are today compared to just 2 or 3 years ago, when retreat was more of the R word for politicians. And by that, I mean, nobody would dare utter the word retreat when it came to the climate crisis. And yet, suddenly, in the last 2 or 3 years, this is being talked about more and more often. Some of the first ones were the political appointees in Monroe County, which is the Florida Keys. And suddenly you're hearing political appointees in Monroe County saying that, you know what, there are some parts of the Keys where we are just not going to be able to afford to upkeep the infrastructure in the face of sea level rise. What does that mean for somebody that lives down that road? It means nobody's going to fix that road. If 50 or 100 times a year it's getting flooded by salt water, and eventually the road is basically going to erode away, swallowed by the sea. So, and this is a very difficult position for a politician, you have to understand, or any political appointee, to be able to talk about abandoning basically some parts of the Florida Keys. But that is now part of the conversation down there. It's part of the conversation in Miami-Dade County, where funds have been allocated for buying out properties that chronically flood because of the changing climate. And I think it's becoming more of the conversation around the state of Florida. So these are just the first, in my opinion, just the first few baby steps in terms of managed retreat. But I think it's a sign that, our elected leaders and others in academia and private industry are realizing that, yeah, I mean, there's parts of South Florida where we just simply cannot be investing in for the long term, and people need to pivot to other drier, higher, safer areas.
Thank you so much for that. And I know that we're just a few minutes after one. I think we'll do one more question if that's okay with you, John. But I did want to share just a quick comment, several comments expressing appreciation, John, for your input in this webinar and your empathy for the poorest and those who have the highest burden. Let's see here. I have another question. So being a public figure and discussing climate in Florida, what kind of tips would you give? Maybe one or two actionable tips on how we can discuss climate in Florida without igniting ugly partisan fights.
You have to meet people where they're at. You can't get on your high horse and let me just grab my textbook here. And pound the science on their heads and say, no, because, 99% of the scientists are saying this, and how can you possibly be a skeptic or be denying what's going on? It's not going to work. And I know it's driving you mad, and it's extremely frustrating, but I'm telling you that if you really want to move the needle, a fire hose of science is not going to help you. You have to meet people where they're at. So try to find common ground. Try to find something that you both can talk about, or that that person is interested about. Maybe this person is an avid runner, and you can talk about the number of days where the heat index is going to exceed 105, and how, it truly is dangerous to be doing strenuous exercise when the heat index is above 105 degrees. You truly can get sick, and bad things can happen. You can end up in the hospital or dead. So if this is something that interests this person, and you can start a conversation, man, this year it's been so hot this summer, my goodness, have you been able to run outside in these conditions? Maybe the person will say, well, I have, but it sure has been hot. And, that's kind of an icebreaker. That's a way to try to meet people where they're at, and that can start the conversation. And it needs to be baby steps. You're not going to get it done in over one cocktail. And please don't have 6 cocktails in one night to try to solve the problem either, right? It's going to take some time. But that would be my biggest recommendation for those one-on-one conversations with family or friends.
Thank you so much for that. And I just wanted to agree with what you said. No one has ever changed their mind by being thrown data and facts. People change their mind through connection. So always finding ways to connect and actively listen to the person you're engaging in a conversation with. Because again, the objective is to connect, not to conquer. So I just want to say that it's past 1 o'clock and we still have over 60 people live on this webinar. So I think that itself is a testament to the importance of this conversation and to the valuable insight that you provide, John. So I just wanted to take this opportunity again to say thank you, John, for joining us. Thank you, the Union of Concerned Scientists, and Bolo, who has also helped with the Florida Climate Crisis campaign. Please make sure to follow Clio on social media to hear more about our Florida Climate Crisis campaign, to see those urgent messages revealed, and to continue following us with action items. John, is there anything you want to say before we let our audience go?
No, I'm happy everybody was able to join. Oftentimes, even more people see these things after the live event. So you know what? Share the video. I'm sure it's going to be on all different platforms. Share this video with others. The reality of what's going on with climate change in Florida, to quote somebody maybe that I don't want to quote, it is what it is. In other words, this is where we're at. This is where we're going. However, we can change it. We can change this path going forward. So that's what makes this different this time. We need to slow down the warming. Yes, we need to adapt. Fine. We got to adapt, but we need to slow down this warming and keep it within a couple of degrees Celsius of where we were at the beginning of the 20th century.
And our job as climate activists is to counter the doom and gloom of the science with the optimism of the climate movement. And that's exactly what you did today, John. Thank you so much. Thank you, Julieta, for supporting. And thank you all for joining. We hope to see you on the 24th for our next webinar. Have a great rest of the day. And watch out for that follow-up email that will include this recording. Bye, everyone. Take care of yourselves.